SFB Addict here with video 3 of the Idiot's Guide to Making a Vassal Module. So the last video we left off at the last item on this short list, and we're going back to a detailed breakdown of your piece menu, where you can add single pieces and multiple pieces, and what all these items do. So your basic piece gives you the ability to add a counter. So if I double click here, let's see, Federation. So I'm going to pull up a Federation CA PNG. So that's my counter. So that would be used on a map. This could also have been something as easy to put in as a tank, an airplane, or a soldier, or a dragon, or anything you want. It's just a picture. And then you give it a name. So now if I go up into pieces, I now have my Federation counter, which I can move down. But I can't do any movement or anything like that. And if I right click, I just get the invisible, the clone, and the delete option. Because that's all I've given it is basic piece and the prototype basic menu items. And the prototype basic menu items, if we remember from the previous video, prototypes, there we go. The basic menu items give us delete, clone, ability to text label, invisible, and mask. Now a text label, if I were to go in here and I actually type something in, has the ability to label. You got to give it a keyboard command. This could be a keyboard shortcut, or as you can see, I'm just giving it text. And you can define your color and your background color, your bolds, the size of your font, etc. And you can do it at top, center, top right, top left. So let's do it top right. Now this isn't going to have it. And let's exit. Oops. Yeah, click OK on this one. And let's save it. There we go. So if I go back to 0, 0, I didn't save it, so let's pull that Fed CA back up. And click OK. And click OK. And if I grab that and bring it down again, you notice it has label there already. But I can go in and I can go change label. And I can call it Fed CA. So it puts it in the top left. So let's go back in here into basic movement items, or menu items I should say, and go back in here. Now there is a offset for vertical. Now remember, negative in Vassal is the Y direction upwards. So let's make this negative 15. So now on the new counters, the label is above the square counter, where previously it was in the top left-hand corner. So that's the text label. And if we don't want to do top right, we could do top center. You don't want that annoying label to come up everywhere. I believe it's that line there. There we go. But you still have the ability to label it by going in and going change label. Now, I've got the text label on my prototype piece of basic menu items, and it's being given to this single piece by adding prototype. So prototype gives this counter everything that I've listed here for traits: delete, clone, text label, invisible, and mask. So it gives me invisible, change label, clone, and delete, but it's not giving me mask. Now that's because I haven't taken a side yet. So if I join a side, I should now have mask, mask, mask. Now remember, the mask that we had previously set up was the little 06. So let's change what the mask is. So instead of doing that little 06, let's go forget where I put this. Oh. There it is, Federation mask. Let's try saving it. And probably have to do a new counter. Yeah, so there it is in the top left-hand corner. That's not quite what we wanted to do, so let's go back in. And we don't want it to be inset. So let's do background. So there's your mask when it's set to background. So it covers the counter with that graphic. Now, one of the things that we haven't been able to do yet is do movement, but we can drag, but we can't rotate. So if we go into moved, we could go down to the, you'll notice these aren't alphabetical, so we can say can rotate. Description, rotate ability. Number, facings allowed 6, blah blah blah. There we go. So we grab a new counter, because old counters don't get the commands for new counters. So let's delete these. Now, let's see, what did we define? Control closed bracket, control open bracket. There we go. Which keys are they? Oh, I don't like that, so let's okay, so the command to rotate clockwise, which is to the right, we'll do Control R. And for the other one, we'll do Control Left. Save it, delete that counter, grab a new counter. And we still don't have, because we haven't added moved. Let's do the prototype. I think it was all small letters moved. Yep. So now when we right click, we get the rotate ability. Or we can do Control R to rotate the piece. So we now have that ability for rotate, in addition to the other traits. And we really don't need that. But how do we move it forward? Well, let's take a look. Move a fixed distance. FWRD, Control M. Distance upwards, we'll leave it at 60. You do advanced options. Additional offset to the right, number of times, additional offset upwards. We really don't need it, so let's just do that. Do that. This is built on moved, so 0, 0 does have moved, but 0, 1 doesn't. So let's save that. So in our drop down here we still have 0, 0 and 0, 1. So let's grab a new one, delete this, bang, and if we right click and go to move forward, the counter goes up. Now it also masked that because move forward is using Control M and our mask disappeared, and I'm gonna bet that our masked is set for Control M. It is. So let's change this to be Alt M. Get rid of the old counter, grab the new counter. Now if we right click, we have Alt M for mask and we have move forward. So if we move forward, it just simply moves forward. So you got to be careful with your naming of your shortcuts for your keyboard because it can toggle more than one thing. So as you can see, we can turn our unit and move our unit. Now what I've done with my ADB game is back up in the definitions. I believe I put it in numpad. I created a whole bunch of actions. So I've got a trigger action of forward, and watch for these keystrokes. So whenever I hit the number pad number 8, it then performs these two keystrokes, Control F and up lock. Well, up lock is a report, so it gets triggered by up lock, and it reports location by going forward. So that was what up lock meant, but what does Control F mean? Well, on another item, I believe it's move forward, move a fixed distance, is Control F. So when I hit my number pad, it moves the piece forward and then reports to chat that the piece has moved by moving forward. So that's how you can build up actions with your traits and using prototypes. Now, this numpad, I could have put all of these on each and every counter that I make, which is a lot of items. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that's 16 items I could have put on each and every counter, but if I have like 30 counters, that's 16 items I'd have to put on each and every one of those 30 counters. But by putting it in a prototype called numpad, I just add that one item numpad to those 30 counters. And if I'm smart in the way I do my counters, I can just simply make one counter and then copy and paste it, and then just go into each one of those 30 items and change the graphic. Okay, so we have the basic piece. We've got delete, which is kind of self-explanatory, and clone, which is self-explanatory, and layer. Well, what does layer do? Well, a layer, for instance in the SFB game, we have one here for fired. What happens is I can right-click on a piece, and I can select fired from the menu, which is the Alt-F command. And what that Alt-F command does is it rotates from no graphic to this fired graphic. So what this does is it puts the word fired right next to the ship graphic. So it would be right along the right-hand side of the ship. That's what layers do. The key commands literally rotate through a sequence of graphics. So if you wanted to, you could, sort of like a little stickman figure running for a flip book, you could do the same thing with your images in layers. Every time you hit the key, it's like flipping one page. So you could actually do a little animation if you wanted to, by hitting that key repeatedly. So you've got options for layers. You can make them always active or not active. So if it's not active, you can put in a key command to make it active. You can loop through the levels, or you can just have one level. And you can have the levels follow an expression value. So you can create a formula. So you can set up your formula to be, if it's in hex 0101, do this. If it's in hex 0102, do this. If it's in hex 0103, do this, in terms of which image layer gets displayed. And you also got to randomize. So when you hit Alt-R, you could go through one of 10 overlay images. So if you're doing a Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing, and you want a little graphic to show up beside your little character's counter of a warrior that's just been hit, it can come up with, out of 5 graphics, let's say, from +1, +2, +3, or +4, +5. So if a wizard casts a spell on your warrior, you randomly hit Alt-S for spell kind of thing on that counter, and it will randomly select one of those 5 selections on the randomized setting, and that's the result of the wizard's spell for trying to help your warrior with his ability to hit. And these buttons are just adding more graphics. So if I want to add level, it adds image 3, and then if I want to add the image, I can go in. I believe there's something here for moved. Yeah. So there's a message there for fired, there's a message for moved, kind of thing. And you can name your level, and you can give it prefixes and suffixes, kind of thing. So that's what levels do. Levels are very powerful in terms of modifying a graphic that's already on the map. So let me close this window. And let's see, let me grab my Starfleet Battles one. Let's just quickly do a new game. I'm just going to do a small blank map. And I'll select let's select Orion. Okay, so let's go in here and let's grab I did say Orion, did I not? I've used layers to add multiple images available for the Orion ships. So if I right click, I have an option for next image. And if I hit Alt N again, it gives me a different image, and a different image, and a different image, and a different image, and a different image for my various counters that are available for Orion. So that's what your layers can do for you. It's just one example of what the layers can do. And if we want to take a look and see what the fired looks like, and you can also do the same thing with moved. And here's another function for layers. Electronic countermeasures, level 1. And we can do the same thing for electronic countermeasures, level 1. And if I look at that, I can use control number pad plus or minus. Oops, gotta have the piece selected to change the levels of what my ECM and ECCM are. And that's all done with layers. Okay, so let's go back to the original game here that we're newly making. And let's open that back up. So that was layers and prototypes, and we've already done text labels and report action. So on a report action, you give it a description, because that's what shows up here on the right. So if you want to know what this bloody thing does, this is where you label it. And on what it does is you're looking for these keystrokes. So if we look for Control X, let's say, you will then cycle through these different messages. So I could do Control X, it stands for explosion maybe. And if I hit Control X, what gets echoed to chat? Explosion happened. Sad day for that chip. So that's all that Control X does. It's a trigger. But you can set this up to do any number of messages, or you can do a sequence of messages. If you don't want to use messages, you can do a report format. So you can create your format by adding the pieces in here. So player ID and location. So when Control X happens, it's just doing newbie. That's because the map doesn't have locations. There's no hex numbers or square numbers or anything like that. That's why the location's not coming up. So location wasn't a good choice. But the only thing we can do really is map name, I guess, from what we've built so far. I'm not even sure we can do that, because I can't remember if we gave the map a name. Yeah, we didn't give the map a name, I don't think. Or the main map or something. But anyway, When it comes to these report item things, you got to sort of play with them to understand what they all mean. And I really haven't done much playing with that. So I guess you got old location, or new piece name, or yeah, you could do new piece name. So you could do something like old piece name, new piece name, and you could do something like changed name to on a control X. And if we go back to our basic text, and we could do control X. So newbie 0, change name to 0. Newbie, fed, change name to 0. So the report format doesn't quite behave the way I expected it to. I expected it to say fed, but then again, my piece name up here is 0. So if I wanted to take out the 0 thing, or I could say fed CA instead of 00. So now it's doing newbie fed CA, clink, change name, fed CA. So it did show what the new name was, but it showed it in brackets. So you could play with your report and the format until you get it doing exactly what you want it to do. But that's an example of doing a report action. And you've also got a trigger action. So, trigger when properties match blah. Or menu command, keyboard command, watch for these keystrokes, blah. And then if that keystroke happens, perform these keystrokes, blah. So, for instance, we could have a map with predefined mines visible on the map. And if a ship goes into the detection radius of one of them, so if it notices that the properties is set that this counter has, or a counter has entered this hex, it could then perform these keystrokes. So that's what an example of a trigger action would be. You get your global hotkey. Description, the menu, that's what you get when you right click. Keyboard command and what that global hotkey is. And of course, you would then have to back over here to find your global hotkey command, which we've already covered in the previous video. And then you got an action button. So a description, invoke such and such a key command, and then you got a button and button offset for X and Y, and a button height. So let's click help on this one. And it brings up the action button. Trait allows you to place a virtual button within your piece. Clicking within the special rectangular region on the piece will invoke an action just as if the corresponding key command had been typed. So basically, again, these are key commands. So I guess if I had a counter of a dragon and I clicked its belly button on the graphic, or I hit a Alt B for belly button, it could then execute a command. And here they give an example. A piece representing a spaceship has a self-destruct action that can only be activated when the energy reaches a minimum level. A layer named energy is used to represent the energy. The image for the lowest level of the layer adds an icon for a self-destruct button. An action button trait uses the boundaries of the button icon and invokes Control-Alt-T. A trigger action watches for Control-Alt-T and invokes the keyboard command for self-destruct when the property match energy level equals 1. So basically you toggle a layer, which then toggles a keystroke, which then toggles another keyboard command, etc. And you could even replace the image of the ship with an image of an explosion kind of thing. Can rotate, we've already looked at that. Can pivot, I've never actually looked at can pivot. So I guess this is for fixed angles. So instead of doing the 6 hexagonal positions, this is how you would do angle changes that aren't for a hex, for like an octagon maybe, or just a square map. And we've seen invisible, it just ghosts your image. We've seen mask. Send to location is supposed to be able to send your counter from one location on a map to another location on a map, or to a completely different board. I've never really played with it. I tried setting it up on a hex map, but apparently it's broken on hex maps. It does apparently work on square maps and other types of maps, but just not a hex map. You got the global key command, which is pretty much the same kind of thing as we've seen outside for global key command. So here it gives you the description, the command name, the keyboard shortcuts, and you can set some matching properties, and you can apply it to a deck or pieces or not. Suppress individual reports or restrict the range. Range 1, 2, 3, etc. So you can do all sorts of things with that. Move a fixed distance, that's how we actually move our piece. Return to deck. So this is how you would return a card to a deck, or return a counter. For instance, if you've got a map that's defined as starbase, unexplored space, explored space, neutral zone, enemy, empire territory, you could use the return to deck options to kind of specify where it goes, kind of thing. Does not stack, pretty self-explanatory. You cannot stack this with another piece. So select piece, how you select the piece, and move the piece normally, never, or only if selected. So I could use this for placing terrain on a map, like asteroids, and I could have it set so that it's only movable if selected, and in order to select it, I've got to hold down the Alt key. So when I click the piece, the asteroid, onto the map and leave it, and click somewhere else, I cannot touch it unless I use my Alt key. Now the property sheet is essentially a spreadsheet. Or sorry, not a spreadsheet. That's spreadsheet to spreadsheet. So a spreadsheet gives you a spreadsheet by number of hex rows and number of columns, and you can use it to do various things, record information, etc. And a property sheet does the same thing. You can set the property, and then for the text type, multi-line, a label, ticks, a spinner, etc., etc. So all sorts of options for here, or a ticks with a maximum value. So let's do that. And again, Vassal opens up the window as a tiny little sliver that you can't see, so let's make that bigger. So that's what you get when you have a property sheet and you got it set to spinner. Now we really haven't set anything up, so let's go back to that. there's your spinner. So you can set up different values for your spinner. And when you do your pluses and minuses on this, it'll go through those various values, which we didn't bother to set up. But that's what the spinner will look like. Instead of a spinner, we can do tick marks with a max field. So if I put in 5, it gives me 5 boxes. And then we can click for values from 1 to 5 on it. So that's what a property sheet can do. We could have done the same thing kind of thing with a spreadsheet. A place marker. I haven't actually ever used this, so let's take a look and see what the reference manual says. A game piece with this trait will have a menu command that places a different piece, the marker, on top of this one. You can select any existing piece for the marker or define a new one from scratch. So basically it's another way of doing masking kind of thing, but it doesn't mask the counter, it just places a 1 on top. A brief description of this trait will appear in the piece definer window. Example, if a game uses a fortification counter to indicate fortified status of an army counter, this trait could be given to the army counter to place a fortification marker on the army with a keyboard command as an alternative to dragging the fortification counter from the game piece palette. So instead of masking the piece, it grabs another piece and places it on top of it, whatever that piece you want it to be. Replace with other. Well, it kind of works sort of like a place marker, but you sort of lose your original counter and it gets replaced with another counter kind of thing. So as you can see, can't open both at the same time. Here, let's do this. Let's pull over my Starfleet Battles window. And if we look at place marker, I think it was, yeah, there we go. Okay, so here's the place marker and there's the replace with other marker. And as you can see, it's exactly the same. The difference is in how the end action occurs. So replace with other removes the original counter and gives you the new counter, whereas the place marker, you've still got the original marker and it adds the new marker. So they both do the same thing, they just have one additional action at the end. Now, non-rectangular I've never looked at before. Let's see what the help says. Allows you to specify an arbitrary shape for a game piece. The shape of a piece is used to determine where the player must click to drag a piece or bring up its pop-up menu. It also is used to highlight the outline of the piece when it has been selected. by using transparency in your image, you can make your piece be drawn with any shape. However, without the non-rectangular trait, the piece can be selected even by clicking on the transparent portions of the image, which can lead to confusion. The non-rectangular trait allows you to specify the shape of the piece to be identical to the non-transparent portion of an image. Simply select the appropriate image from the drop-down list. As I said, I've never used it. And your drop-down list just gives you all your other images that you've used in the module so far. Play a sound, pretty simple. So you have a keyboard command that will play a sound when you do the keyboard command. So if you right-click, it would give you an option to play that sound. Or you could do control whatever keyboard shortcut you set up. And you can send the sound to other players, or only you can hear it. Mark when moved. So this basically adds the graphic moved to your counter, and you can give it a horizontal offset or a vertical offset. And I've already shown you that with my SFB example, where it's added both moved and fired. So that's what that does. And then movement trail does exactly that. It gives you a line thickness trail. So let's again show you that with my Starfleet Battles example. So that light blue is a movement trail. And you can turn that on and off. Now you notice that fired is rotating with my ship, but moved isn't. And that's just simply because of the way the moved and the fire were set up. So let me just turn off my ECM and ECCM. So you can see fired is rotating with the ship. And I can do my movement trail on and off kind of thing. So now when I move my ship, the movement trail is not happening. And if I do my movement trail on, it comes back. And if I do my mark as moved, it gets rid of the marked as moved and gets rid of the movement trail. And it clears the movement trail when I use marked as moved. So I can't bring the movement trail back. So those are options on how you build your traits. Okay, area of effect. So I could do this as boom, use map shading, don't use map shading, or use a fill color, opacity of 30%, fixed radius, radius of 1, always visible, not always visible, toggle visible command, show area, or I could go explode, and whoops, drop the E. Let's do Alt E or Control E. So, whoops, I don't have a map open. Let's open the map. And it's not working, so let's go back and take a look. Area of effect. Let's use map shading, or not use map. take a look at... Let me start with my Battles one for a second. I believe I got this set up for a prototype for explosion, if I can see it. Yeah, there we go, area of effect. Okay, I guess I used always visible. Let's take a look at this for a second. Now this could not be giving me what I want because I haven't actually defined a hex grid or anything yet. So that's probably what it is. It probably doesn't understand how to do the radius. Yep, it's got to be defined as a rectangular or a hexagonal grid for the distance. So that's why it's not working. But basically, it will, once I define the hex grid and everything in the map, do that. Or you can use a different set of graphics instead of the shading. So that's what your explosion trait will let you do once you actually set up your map grid and your hex grid and all that. Right now it doesn't understand what radius 1 means, so therefore it's not doing what I want it to do, because I haven't done that step yet. That's area of effect. The submenu is exactly that. So you can create submenus. So there's your submenu, and then once I define what those other items are, it'll show up. But for now it just gives me what the option here is. So if I were to go in here and 1 and 2 aren't available, let's say delete. I forget if that's a capital D for delete, so let's do both. And same thing with clone, I forget if it's a capital C or not. So that's the old counter. I might have mistyped clone, but anyway, that's what your submenu will do is it'll give you that. Oh, I didn't save it, that's why. There we go. So there's your submenu containing both delete and clone. So when your menu gets too long, you can start to make submenus. Okay, setting a global property, we've kind of already looked at that before. So you can set a global property, set a condition, set a zone, make it numeric or not, and make it issue other key commands. Calculated property and dynamic property are kind of the same thing, just different settings. So you could set something up like, for instance, energy level and set up an expression for it. You do a dynamic property. Same thing, a name, a value. If it's numeric or not, then it issues a command. So for instance, you could set up a character with a health rating, and if the health rating falls below 0, then the calculated property will then issue a key command for explode, and then your character goes boom and gets its area of effect activated, and bits and pieces of the character as a graphic gets spread out over the map. That's what you can kind of do with your dynamic and your calculated and your global properties kind of thing. Basically, it's set a condition kind of thing, a value, and then issue a key command. And same thing with a marker's a little different. Let me pull up the definition for this from the manual. So here the example of a marker is a damage. So it gives a piece a property. So here the damage is the property and gives it a value of 5. So that health or damage level can be set on the piece, and it can be changed with global key commands, in-game piece layers, and expressions. And we go down here and it's got an example. A marker with a property named owner, property value Sigmund, would return Sigmund from get property owner. Use commas to set multiple properties with a single marker. A marker with name owner, comma, status, hiccups, and value Sigmund unknown would also return unknown from get property status. So if there's some sort of a query for finding out who owns a piece, you can sort of set that up that way. Now in my Starfleet Battles setup, let's get outside of civilian, let's pull up Federation. I use the marker to specify a counter ownership, and I've set it up as Federation, and then I've used that value in the map with my units listing, or the piece inventory window, to specify what units get listed in what items. So I've got Orion units off map, I've got Orion units only, and then I've got Orion units on map. Units on map. So this is everything that's on the map, and this would be only the Orion units that are on the map. So if I go back to starships and put an Orion unit on the map and go refresh, and if I go here and refresh, this shows the 2 explosions and the Orion ship, and this one shows only the Orion ship. So my inventory window of Orion units only is using that marker value for the counter of Orion to list only Orion ships. And you can do, I've done the same thing with all the other races. So that's one way you can use a marker in combination with an inventory window. So, restricted commands and restricted access. Well, restricted access is a way of restricting who can touch and move and do things to a counter. So, you can set your sides and restrict counters specifically to that side. So, in my Starfleet Battles game, I'm currently set up as the Orion player, so if I change this from Orion to Lyran counters, and if I try and grab the Lyran counter and move it to the map, it does nothing because I am not a Lyran player, because I have a restriction on my pieces for restricted access, restricting it to each race. So if I were to go down to my Lyran, I have a restricted access, restricting it to only the Lyran player, or the Lyran team, or the Lyran side. So that's what the restricted access does. And restrict commands. Description, restriction, hide or disable. restrict your properties that match, and restrict these key commands. So if you want to allow other players to be able to right-click on a piece and get the menu items, but restrict specific menu items, you can restrict that specific menu item. So you want to allow them to be able to move a piece but not delete the piece. You could restrict or hide the delete command keystroke. So that's what that would do for you. Now, the fun thing about these traits is that they only affect things above them. So let me pull up my Starfleet Battles one. Let me make this window bigger. So you'll notice that I have restricted access. Oh, here, let me pull up other pieces. T-bomb, I believe, is one. There we go. And I believe ESG is the other one. Yeah. Okay, so in this basic piece, I have layers. Whoops, wrong one. So an ESG is an energy field that can be set to radius 1, 2, or 3. So let me set that here. Anyway. Let's take a look at the piece order. And we're going to pay attention to restricted and the layer and the masking. So here, the masking and the masking are pretty low. And here, the masking is also pretty low. But here, the layer is below masking, but here, the layer is above masking, and here, the layer is above masking. Let me become Lyran. So you now see that as Lyran, I have access to the full menu, and I have access to the full menu, and I have access to the full menu. Now, if I give up my position as Lyran, and just become an observer, here when I click on ESG, the graphic disappears, and I've got only show data, change, and mark moved, and movement trail is restricted to me. Here I've only got show data and next image, and here I've just got change label, mark moved, and conceal. So, and in here my masking and my restricting are both acting upon the layer and everything about the ship. So since restricted access and masking hide prototype ship, and prototype ship contains all my stuff for movement as a prototype, I get nothing for movement other than marking it moved. But you notice that prototype moved is below mask, so that's why I see it. Over here I only get show data and next image, because of the placement of layer below mask and below restricted access. So placement in this list and the order in which it's placed will determine how it affects things. And I actually did a separate video on that, and I called that video Vassal Trait Mask Layers Restricted Access and How They Interact. So you can take a look at that little video to get a little bit more on how the placement order will affect things. So this video has covered the traits and what they all do. And I do believe I've covered all of them. I believe I have. So as you can imagine, setting up global commands and replace with or using the marker and your prototypes, you can set up all sorts of commands and keystrokes that only happen in certain instances and not in others. So if you open up other modules and go into edit and you go into their pieces and you start looking at their traits and their prototypes, you can start to understand how they are put together. So there we go. That's the end of my Idiot's Guide to Making a Vassal Module video number 3. So there's kind of 4 videos in total. One of them's not quite called an Idiot's Guide. It's the one about the traits and the effects of order. So hopefully these little videos are useful to somebody out there and saves you some trouble and helps you make a module. Have a good day.